The stars look different out here in the deep space between the colonies, Dr. Harold. Kane pressed his weathered face against the small window of his cabin aboard the exploration vessel, Meridian, and watched the distant lights drift past. At 78 years old, his body moved slower than it used to, but his mind remained sharp as ever. The other passengers on this 3-month journey saw him as just another elderly consultant heading to the outer rim worlds to share his knowledge about alien life forms. They had no idea who he really was. Harry adjusted his simple gray jumpsuit and made his way down the corridor toward the main dining hall. The ship buzzed with activity as usual. Scientists discussed their research projects in excited whispers. Engineers checked and double-checked their equipment. Families heading to new colony worlds tried to keep their children entertained during the long voyage. "Morning, Doc," called out Pete Sullivan, a young engineer with grease-stained hands and a friendly smile. "Sleep well?" "Like a baby," Harry replied with a chuckle. Pete was one of the few people who actually talked to him regularly. Most of the crew and passengers were polite but distant. They saw an old man with gray hair and tired eyes who moved with the careful steps of someone whose best days were behind him. If only they knew the truth, Captain. Lisa Morgan stood near the main viewport, studying a datapad with intense concentration. She was a competent officer in her 40s, with short brown hair and the kind of steady confidence that came from years of deep space experience. Harry had watched her handle several minor crises during their journey with calm professionalism. "Captain," Harry nodded as he passed. "Dr. Kane," she replied with a brief smile. "Enjoying the view?" "Always do." Space has a way of putting things in perspective. The dining hall filled with the usual morning chatter. Harry took his regular seat at a corner table where he could observe everyone without drawing attention. Old habits died hard, even after all these years. Dr. Nathan Brooks, a xenobiologist about Harry's age, but with twice the enthusiasm, joined him with a tray of synthetic eggs and coffee. "Ready for another exciting day of cataloging star charts?" Nathan asked with good humor. "The excitement never ends," Harry replied dryly. They ate in comfortable silence for a while. Nathan had become something of a friend during the voyage, one of the few people who seemed genuinely interested in Harry's stories about his consulting work on various worlds. Of course, Harry only shared the boring, official parts of his career. The classified material stayed locked away in his memory where it belonged, communications. Officer Jake Williams suddenly looked up from his station near the front of the dining hall. His young face showed confusion as he tapped his earpiece and frowned at his instruments. "Captain," Jake called out, his voice carrying a note of concern. "I'm picking up some unusual readings on long-range sensors." Captain Morgan immediately moved to his station. "Define unusual." "Large object approaching fast, really fast. It's not showing up on any of our identification systems." The conversation in the dining hall gradually died down as people noticed the tension at the communications station. Harry felt a familiar cold sensation in his stomach. After decades of training and combat experience, he had learned to trust his instincts when they warned him of danger. "How large?" Captain Morgan asked. "Bigger than us." "Much bigger." "And Captain, it's not following any known flight pattern. It's moving like—" Jake never finished his sentence. The lights in the dining hall suddenly dimmed, then flickered back to emergency power. A low humming sound filled the air, growing stronger by the second. Through the viewports, Harry could see a massive shadow blocking out the stars. "All hands to emergency stations," Captain Morgan announced over the ship's communication system. Her voice remained calm, but Harry could hear the underlying tension. "This is not a drill." The humming sound became a roar. The Meridian shuddered as something powerful gripped the ship from outside. Emergency lights bathed everything in red. People stood up from their tables, looking around with growing fear and confusion. Harry remained seated, his hands steady on the table. He had been in situations like this before, though it had been many years. The size and power of whatever had caught them suggested technology far beyond human capabilities. That narrowed down the possibilities considerably. "We're caught in some kind of tractor beam," Jake reported, his voice rising with panic. Engines are offline. We can't break free. Through the main viewport, Harry could see the edge of an enormous vessel. The hull was dark and organic-looking, with ridged surfaces that reminded him of insect carapaces. His blood ran cold as recognition set in. "Everyone remain calm," Captain Morgan ordered, but her voice carried less authority now. "Security teams to defensive positions." Security Chief Amanda Ross and her small team of guards moved through the dining hall, trying to organize the frightened passengers. They carried standard-issue plasma pistols that might work against human threats but would be useless against what was coming. The ship's hull groaned under tremendous stress. Somewhere in the distance, Harry could hear the screech of metal being torn apart. They were being pulled inside the larger vessel, probably into some kind of docking bay. "Jake, get me a communication channel to whoever's out there," Captain Morgan commanded. "I'm trying, Captain, but they're jamming all frequencies." "Doctor." Nathan Brooks grabbed Harry's arm. "What do you think it is? Pirates?" Harry looked at his friend's worried face and chose his words carefully. "I don't think so, Nathan. Pirates would want to talk first, demand surrender or cargo. This feels different." The Meridian came to a sudden stop with a bone-jarring impact that knocked several people to the floor. The artificial gravity fluctuated for a moment, making Harry's stomach lurch. Then everything went silent except for the nervous breathing of 43 humans who had no idea what was about to happen to them. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Harry could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. Around the dining hall, people whispered prayers or held each other close. Children cried softly while their parents tried to comfort them with false reassurances. Then came the sound that Harry had hoped never to hear again, a rhythmic clicking noise that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It was a form of communication, but not one that human ears were meant to understand. The clicking grew louder and more complex, like dozens of conversations happening in an alien language designed for creatures with very different vocal cords. Heavy footsteps echoed through the ship's corridors. Not the soft padding of human feet, but the sharp tapping of something with natural armor plating. Multiple sets of footsteps, moving with military precision toward the dining hall. Captain Morgan drew her sidearm, though her hand shook slightly. "Security positions. Protect the civilians." The few security guards spread out around the room, weapons raised but faces pale with fear. They were brave people doing their duty, but Harry could see in their eyes that they knew their training had never prepared them for this. The footsteps stopped just outside the dining hall entrance. The clicking sounds became a rapid-fire exchange, like a command being given and acknowledged. Harry found himself unconsciously straightening in his chair, old military habits taking over despite the decades that had passed. The entrance doors exploded inward with tremendous force, sending twisted metal flying across the room. People screamed and dove for cover. Through the smoking hole stepped creatures that seemed designed by evolution specifically for killing. They stood 7 feet tall on powerful legs that ended in clawed feet. Their bodies were covered in natural armor plating that gleamed like polished obsidian. Multiple arms ending in razor-sharp talons hung at their sides. But it was their heads that truly inspired terror. Insectoid faces with compound eyes and mandibles that clicked constantly as they surveyed the room full of prey. Kithara. Harry hadn't seen one in over 40 years, but he would never forget what they looked like. The lead creature wore decorative armor that marked him as a leader among his kind. He moved into the room with the confidence of an apex predator who had never encountered anything he couldn't kill. His compound eyes swept across the frightened humans, evaluating each one with the calculating gaze of a hunter selecting his next target. Security. Chief Ross opened fire with her plasma pistol. The bright energy blast struck the lead Kithara center mass and dissipated harmlessly against his natural armor. He turned toward her with what might have been amusement and made a gesture with one of his secondary arms. Ross collapsed to the floor, paralyzed but still conscious. Her weapon clattered away across the metal deck. The other security guards suffered the same fate within seconds, their bodies failing them even as their minds remained alert and terrified. More Kithara poured into the dining hall. They moved with practiced efficiency, using some kind of neural disruptor field to paralyze the humans without killing them. People toppled from their chairs and lay helpless on the floor, their eyes wide with fear but their bodies completely unresponsive. Harry felt the familiar tingling sensation as the neural field reached him. His muscles began to stiffen, but he didn't fight it. He had experienced Kithara technology before and knew that resistance was futile. Instead, watched calmly as the creatures systematically subdued every human in the room. The silence in the dining hall stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Every Kithara in the room had frozen at Harry's words. Their clicking sounds completely stopped for the first time since they had boarded the ship. The paralyzed humans could only watch with wide eyes as the tension built between the old man and the alien leader. The Kithara commander slowly removed his ceremonial helmet, revealing a face that was both terrifying and strangely familiar. Scars crisscrossed the dark chitin of his features in patterns that Harry recognized immediately. 3 parallel marks across the left side of the skull, a deep gouge along the mandible. Battle wounds from training exercises conducted decades ago on a world far from here. "Impossible," the creature whispered, his voice carrying undertones that only Harry could interpret. Fear mixed with recognition, mixed with something that might have been respect, Harry struggled to sit up against. The effects of the neural field. His muscles responded sluggishly, but years of discipline helped him fight through the paralysis better than the other humans could. "Hello, Zek. You've grown since I last saw you." The other Kithara began clicking excitedly among themselves, but their leader silenced them with a sharp gesture. His compound eyes never left Harry's face as he processed what he was seeing. The frail old human before him couldn't possibly be the legendary figure from his youth, and yet the scars, the voice, the way he looked directly at a Kithara without flinching, it all matched his memories. "You died," Zekthar said finally. "The records stated that Colonel Harrison Kane died in a shuttle crash 43 years ago." "The records say a lot of things," Harry replied calmly. "Most of them are classified so deep that even the people who wrote them forgot they existed." Dr. Nathan Brooks lay paralyzed nearby, listening to this impossible conversation with growing confusion. The mild-mannered consultant he had befriended was talking to these alien monsters as if he knew them personally. More disturbing, they seemed to know him too. Zekthar paced in a tight circle, his clawed feet clicking against the metal floor. The behavior was familiar to Harry. It was what young Kithara did when they were processing complex information. That challenged everything they thought they knew. Some habits never changed, no matter how many decades passed. "Project Apex," Zekthar said suddenly. "The Human Training Initiative. You were the primary instructor." "I was," Harry confirmed. "And you were student designation K7, though I always called you Zek because your full name took too long to pronounce properly." The memories came flooding back to Harry as he spoke. 51 years ago, when Earth was still struggling to understand its place in the galactic community, first contact had not gone as anyone expected. Instead of the peaceful exchange of knowledge that diplomats had hoped for, humanity found itself recruited for one of the strangest military operations in galactic history. The problem had been the Kithara youth. For centuries, the species had maintained a delicate balance between their predatory nature and the demands of civilized society. Adult Kithara could control their hunting instincts and function as productive members of the galactic community. But something had gone wrong with the younger generation. They had become killing machines. Pure predators with no sense of discipline, strategy, or restraint. They hunted for the joy of the kill alone, leaving devastation across multiple star systems. Entire colonies had been wiped out by packs of young Kithara, who saw other sentient beings as nothing more than prey to be consumed. The Galactic Council had been on the verge of declaring the entire species a threat to interstellar peace when an unprecedented solution was proposed. Earth's military advisors had studied the problem and concluded that the young Kithara weren't inherently evil, they were simply untrained. Their society had lost the ability to properly educate their own youth in the art of controlled hunting. But humans had something unique. They were predators themselves, but predators who had learned to channel their aggression into discipline, strategy, and teamwork. Human military training methods might be exactly what the young Cathara needed. Colonel Harrison Kane had been chosen to lead the program because of his unusual combination of skills. He was a master tactician with 30 years of military experience, but he also had a doctorate in xenopsychology and a natural talent for understanding alien minds. More importantly, he wasn't afraid of creatures that stood 7 feet tall and could tear him apart with their bare claws. The training world of KEPLER 442b had been selected for its isolation and harsh environment. For 15 years, Harry and a small team of human instructors worked with groups of young Cathara, teaching them everything from advanced combat techniques to the subtle art of knowing when not to kill. Harry's methods had been revolutionary. Instead of trying to suppress the Cathara's predatory instincts, he taught them to master those instincts. He showed them how to hunt with purpose instead of bloodlust, how to work as a pack instead of competing with each other, how to see other sentient beings as potential allies rather than automatic prey. The results had exceeded everyone's wildest expectations. The Cathara trained by Harry's program became legends throughout the galaxy. They served as peacekeepers, protectors, and elite soldiers who could be trusted with the most delicate missions. They retained their fearsome abilities, but gained something their species had been missing for generations: honor. Zekthar had been one of Harry's most promising students. Quick to learn, naturally gifted at strategy, and possessed of a tactical mind that impressed even his human instructors. Harry had expected great things from the young Cathara. "You became a hunt master," Harry observed, noting the ceremonial markings on Zekthar's armor. "I'm proud of you, Zek. That was always your dream." "The highest hunt master," Zekthar replied, but there was no pride in his voice. "I command 17 hunting packs across 4 sectors. My warriors have claimed over 3,000 trophies in the last decade alone." The words hit Harry like a physical blow. Trophies, the old terminology that referred to sentient beings killed for sport. The very thing he had trained an entire generation of Cathara to avoid. "The blood games," Harry said quietly. "You're taking prisoners for the arena again." Zekthar's mandibles clicked in what Harry recognized as shame. The old ways returned. "Teacher, after you vanished, after the program ended, our people gradually forgot your lessons. The young ones demanded action, not philosophy. They wanted to hunt, not serve as galactic peacekeepers." Around the room, the other Cathara listened to their leader's confession with obvious discomfort. They had never heard him speak of doubt before, never seen him show anything resembling weakness. Yet this elderly human seemed to strip away years of acquired reputation with just a few words. "So you gave them what they wanted," Harry said. "You let them drag you back into the darkness." "I had no choice." Zekthar snapped, his voice rising to a roar that made the paralyzed humans flinch. "Do you think I wanted this? Do you think I enjoyed watching everything you taught us crumble into dust?" The emotional outburst surprised everyone in the room, including Zekthar himself. Cathara huntmasters were supposed to be above such displays. They were supposed to be perfect predators with complete control over themselves and their subordinates. Harry studied his former student with the practiced eye of someone who had spent decades reading alien psychology. He could see the internal conflict written in every line of Zekthar's posture. This wasn't the confident killer who had boarded the ship. This was a lost student who had spent 40 years trying to live up to an impossible standard without the guidance that had made it possible in the first place. "You always were too hard on yourself," Harry said gently. "Remember what I taught you about leadership, Zek. Sometimes the hardest choice is admitting when you've made a mistake." "Mistakes can be corrected," Zekthar replied, but his voice carried less certainty than before. "What you see here, this cannot be undone. These humans are destined for the arena." "My warriors expect blood and glory." "Your warriors expect you to lead them," Harry corrected. "Just like you always did when you were young. The question is whether you're going to lead them toward something worthy of the training I gave you, or keep dragging them deeper into a pit that satisfies no one." Captain Morgan lay paralyzed nearby, listening to this surreal conversation with growing hope. The old consultant she had dismissed as harmless was somehow negotiating with the alien commander as an equal. More than that, he seemed to have some kind of psychological advantage over the creature. Dr. Nathan Brooks was having similar thoughts, though his were mixed with bewilderment. The mild-mannered Harry Kane he thought he knew was apparently someone else entirely. Someone important enough that the leader of these terrifying aliens treated him with a mixture of fear and respect. Zekthar stood silent for a long moment, processing everything Harry had said. Around him, his warriors waited for orders that didn't come. The clicking sounds that normally filled the air when Kithara were present had been replaced by an uncomfortable silence. "The arena games have been scheduled," Zekthar said finally. "My reputation depends on providing worthy opponents for the young hunters. If I return empty-handed, they will challenge my leadership. There will be civil war among our people." "Then don't return empty-handed," Harry said simply. The effects of the neural field were beginning to wear off. Around the dining hall, the paralyzed humans started to regain small movements in their fingers and toes. Captain Morgan managed to turn her head slightly to watch the ongoing conversation between Harry and the alien commander. What she saw defied everything she thought she understood about the situation. Zekthar paced in increasingly agitated circles, his clawed feet leaving small scratches in the metal floor. The other Kithara warriors stood motionless, waiting for their leader to give them direction. But their huntmaster seemed lost in thought, struggling with memories and emotions that his training had never prepared him to handle. "You speak of demonstration," Zekthar said finally. "But you are old, teacher. Your body has grown weak. Even if your mind remains sharp, what could you possibly show my warriors that would impress them more than fresh prey for the games?" Harry slowly pushed himself into a sitting position, his movements careful but steady. The neural field had affected him less than the others, though he wasn't sure if that was due to his age or some residual resistance from his military training decades ago. "I'm old?" "Yes," Harry agreed, "but I'm not dead yet. And neither are the skills you learned from me, if you're willing to remember them." The old man looked around the room, taking in the frightened faces of his fellow passengers. Dr. Nathan Brooks had managed to regain enough movement to prop himself up on one elbow. Pete Sullivan was flexing his fingers, testing how much control he had recovered. Security Chief Ross remained completely paralyzed, but her eyes tracked every word of the conversation. "These people are under my protection now," Harry continued, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "If you want them for your games, you'll have to go through me first." Several of Zekthar's warriors made clicking sounds that Harry recognized as laughter. The idea of a frail human challenging their huntmaster struck them as absurd. But Zekthar silenced them with a sharp gesture, his compound eyes never leaving Harry's face. "You would challenge me?" Zekthar asked. "After all these years, you would pit yourself against what you helped me become." "Not a challenge," Harry corrected. "A test. You've forgotten what it means to be a true hunter. Zek, you've let yourself become nothing more than a glorified executioner, taking easy prey to satisfy the bloodlust of untrained youngsters." The words hit their target. Zekthar's mandibles clicked rapidly in what Harry knew was anger mixed with wounded pride. Around the room, the other Kithara shifted uneasily. They had never heard anyone speak to their leader with such casual disrespect. "I am the greatest hunt master of my generation," Zekthar snarled. "My kill count exceeds that of any warrior in Kithara history. I have led successful hunts across 17 star systems." "Kill count," Harry said with obvious disgust. "Is that what I taught you? To measure your worth by how many beings you've slaughtered?" Dr. Nathan Brooks watched this exchange with growing amazement. The mild-mannered consultant he thought he knew was verbally dismantling a 7-foot-tall alien killing machine with nothing more than disappointed lectures. Even more incredible, it was working. The creature seemed genuinely affected by Harry's criticism. "What I taught you," Harry continued, "was that a true hunter doesn't prove himself by killing everything he encounters. A true hunter shows discipline, strategy, and wisdom. He knows when to strike and when to show mercy. He protects the weak instead of preying on them. Zekthar stopped pacing and stood perfectly still. For a moment, Harry thought he might have pushed too far. The alien's posture suggested he was preparing to attack, and even with his advanced age, Harry remembered exactly how fast a Kithara could move when provoked. But instead of violence, Zekthar's voice became quiet and thoughtful. "You want me to prove that I remember your teachings. I want you to prove that you're worthy of the name I gave you," Harry replied. "Zekthar the Precise. Do you remember why I called you that?" The alien leader's head tilted in the gesture Harry knew meant he was accessing old memories. "Because I never missed a target. Because I could calculate the exact amount of force needed for any situation. Because you were the only student who could hunt a razorwing without killing it," Harry said. "You could disable prey without permanent harm. You understood that true skill meant having options besides death." Captain Morgan had recovered enough movement to sit up slowly. She watched this psychological battle between human and alien with fascination and growing hope. Whatever Harry was doing, it seemed to be working. The confident killer who had boarded their ship was showing signs of uncertainty for the first time. "The Razorwing," Zekthar repeated softly. "I had forgotten." "You've forgotten a lot of things," Harry said. "But it's not too late to remember, if you're brave enough to try." The challenge hung in the air like a weapon waiting to be used. Around the room, Kithara warriors clicked nervously among themselves. They could sense that something important was happening, but they didn't understand what their leader was struggling with. "What do you propose?" Zekthar asked finally. Harry struggled to his feet, moving with the careful dignity of someone who refused to show weakness despite his physical limitations. "Traditional rules? Ancient Kithara law? If I can prove that I still possess the skills of a true hunter, you release these prisoners and reconsider your path. If I fail, you can proceed with your games. And how would you prove such a thing? You can barely stand without assistance." "Take me to Kepler 442b, Harry said simply. The name of the training world sent ripples of shock through the assembled Kithara. Several of them took involuntary steps backward, clicking in what Harry recognized as surprise and fear. Kepler 442b was legendary among their people, the world where impossible things had happened, where humans had taught Kithara to be more than they ever thought possible. "The training grounds were abandoned decades ago," Zekthar said. "The facilities are ruins, but the challenges remain," Harry replied. "The obstacles we built to test your generation are still there. If I can complete the final trial that you passed as a young warrior, will you acknowledge that the old teachings still have value?" Zekthar's entire body went rigid with shock. The final trial was a rite of passage that had nearly killed him as a young Kithara in peak physical condition. The idea of a 78-year-old human attempting it was beyond insane. "Teacher," Zekthar said, his voice carrying genuine concern for the first time, "the final trial would kill you. Even if you possess all the knowledge from before, your body cannot endure what mine barely survived." "Maybe," Harry admitted, "but that's my choice to make. The question is whether you're willing to honor the old agreements if I succeed." Dr. Nathan Brooks had recovered enough to speak, though his words came out as a hoarse whisper. "Harry, what are you doing? You can't seriously be considering I know what I'm doing." "Nathan," Harry replied without taking his eyes off Zekthar, "this isn't about me anymore. It's about reminding someone I care about who he used to be." Pete Sullivan managed to push himself into a sitting position. "Doc, I don't know what's going on here, but these things will kill you. You can't trust them." "I'm not trusting them," Harry said calmly. "I'm trusting him, and hoping that somewhere, underneath all the blood and glory, there's still a trace of the student I once knew." Zekthar stood in silence for a long time, processing the implications of Harry's challenge. His warriors waited for guidance that didn't come. The paralyzed humans watched with a mixture of hope and terror as their fate balanced on the edge of an old man's desperate gamble. Finally, Zekthar spoke in the formal tones reserved for sacred oaths. "If you complete the final trial, I will release your people and consider returning to the old ways. But if you fail, if you die in the attempt, these prisoners will face the games as planned. Do you accept these terms?" Harry straightened his shoulders and looked directly into the compound eyes of the creature he had once trained. "I accept." Captain Morgan found her voice at last. "Dr. Kane, you can't do this. We don't even know what this trial involves. You could be walking into certain death." "Captain," Harry replied with a slight smile, 40 years ago I taught the most dangerous predators in the galaxy how to hunt with honor instead of bloodlust. If I'm going to die, I can't think of a better cause than reminding them of those lessons." Zekthar made a gesture to his warriors, who began the process of moving their prisoners to holding cells aboard the Kithara vessel, but his eyes remained fixed on Harry with an expression that mixed respect, fear, and something that might have been hope. "Kepler 442b is 3 days' travel from here," Zekthar said. "That will give you time to prepare, and me time to contact others who remember the old training." "Others?" Harry asked. "You were not the only teacher, and I was not your only student. Word will spread quickly that the legendary Harrison Kane has returned. Many will want to witness what happens next." As the Kithara warriors escorted their human prisoners toward the exit, Harry paused and looked back at the dining hall where everything had changed. In 3 days, he would face a trial designed to test warriors in their prime. At his age, with his physical limitations, survival seemed impossible. But for the first time in 40 years, Harry felt truly alive. The red sun of Kepler 442b hung low in the purple sky as the Kithara transport vessel descended through the planet's atmosphere. Harry pressed his face against the small window of his cell and watched the landscape unfold below. 40 years had changed the world dramatically. What had once been carefully maintained training grounds were now overgrown with native vegetation. Massive vine-like plants had wrapped themselves around the obstacle courses and climbing structures he remembered so well, but the bones of the facility remained. The central tower where he had once conducted lectures still stood against the horizon, though its walls were cracked and stained by decades of weather. The arena where young Kithara had learned to hunt with precision instead of rage was visible, beneath a carpet of purple moss. The sight brought back memories both wonderful and painful. Dr. Nathan Brooks sat beside Harry in the cramped cell, his face pale with worry. "You don't have to do this, Harry. There has to be another way." "There isn't," Harry replied quietly. "Trust me, Nathan. I've been thinking about this for 3 days, and I can't see any other solution. Zekthar is trapped by his own reputation and the expectations of his warriors. The only way to free him is to prove that the old ways still have value." Captain Morgan occupied the cell across the narrow corridor. She had spent the journey trying to understand how a simple consultant had become the center of an interstellar crisis. "What exactly is this final trial you agreed to face?" Harry was quiet for a moment, remembering the challenge he had designed decades ago. "It's a test I created to measure whether young Kithara had truly learned everything we tried to teach them. Physical skill, tactical thinking, and most importantly, the wisdom to know when mercy is stronger than violence." Pete Sullivan gripped the bars of his cell. "But you're not a young Kithara. You're a 78-year-old human. How can you possibly pass a test designed for alien warriors in their prime?" "I can't," Harry admitted, "at least not the way they did. But maybe I can find a different path to the same destination." The transport touched down in the central courtyard of the abandoned facility. Through the windows, Harry could see other Kithara vessels arriving from across the sector. Word had indeed spread quickly about his return. Warriors who had trained under human instructors decades ago were coming to witness what might be the final demonstration of the old teachings. Zekthar appeared outside their cells, flanked by guards but moving with less confidence than he had shown aboard the Meridian. The 3-day journey had given him time to think, and thinking had clearly not improved his mood. "Teacher," he said formally, "the trial ground has been prepared. Other huntmasters have arrived to serve as witnesses. There is still time to withdraw your challenge if you have reconsidered." Harry stood slowly, his joints protesting the movement. "I haven't changed my mind, Zek, but before we begin, I want to see the others. How many of my former students are here?" 7 huntmasters and their senior warriors. perhaps 300 Kithara in total. They remember the old days, though most have followed the same path I have in recent years. The cell doors opened with a hiss of hydraulics. Harry stepped out into the corridor, followed by his fellow prisoners. They were escorted through the ship and down a ramp into the courtyard where Harry had once stood every morning to address classes of young predators. Eager to learn the art of controlled hunting, the assembled Kithara created an impressive and terrifying sight. Hundreds of 7-foot-tall warriors in full ceremonial armor, their compound eyes reflecting the red sunlight like scattered jewels. But Harry noticed something that the other humans missed. The way the aliens held themselves, the pattern of their clicking conversations, the respectful distance they maintained from certain areas of the courtyard. They were nervous. These legendary killers were afraid of this place and what it represented. They remembered when human instructors had pushed them beyond their perceived limitations and taught them to be more than simple predators. The memories made them uncomfortable because those lessons had revealed weaknesses they preferred to forget. Zekthar led the group toward the trial ground, a series of interconnected obstacles that stretched across nearly a mile of varied terrain. Harry remembered designing each challenge with specific lessons in mind. The maze of mirrors that taught warriors to think beyond their physical senses. The tower of patience that rewarded careful planning over aggressive action. The garden of choices where success required mercy instead of violence. The rules remain as they were established 41 years ago, Zekthar announced to the assembled crowd. The challenger must complete all 7 trials within the time limit of 1 planetary day. Failure at any stage means death. Success brings honor and the right to make a formal request of the witnesses. Dr. Nathan Brooks grabbed Harry's arm. A full day? Harry, you can't possibly maintain that level of exertion for 26 hours. Your heart won't take it. My heart will do what it has to do, Harry replied calmly. But you're right about the time limit. I'll need to be smarter than I am strong. The first trial was the Cliff of Trust, a vertical rock face 200 feet high with handholds that had been deliberately weakened over the years. Young Kithara had climbed it using their natural strength and agility. Harry studied the cliff for several minutes, then walked to a pile of equipment that had been left nearby. What are you doing? Zekthar asked, using my brain instead of my muscles, Harry replied, selecting a length of synthetic rope and a set of climbing anchors. I designed these trials to test more than just physical ability. They were supposed to reward intelligence and creativity. The assembled Kithara clicked among themselves as Harry rigged a pulley system that would reduce the effort needed to climb the cliff. Several of the older hunt masters recognized the technique from their own training and began to remember lessons they had forgotten. It took Harry 3 hours to reach the top of the cliff, but he made it without serious injury. The younger Kithara seemed disappointed by his methodical approach, but the veterans nodded approvingly. They remembered being taught that survival often depended on finding the smartest solution rather than the most dramatic one. The second trial was the maze of mirrors, a complex labyrinth filled with reflective surfaces designed to confuse a hunter's visual tracking abilities. Harry entered the maze moving slowly and carefully, using techniques he had taught decades ago. He touched walls instead of relying on sight, listened for the subtle sound differences that indicated direction, and most importantly, he stopped regularly to think instead of charging ahead blindly. Young Kithara typically completed the maze in 30 minutes through speed and aggression. Harry took 2 hours, but he emerged at the correct exit with a smile on his face. The watching warriors clicked in surprise and what might have been approval. He remembers, one of the hunt masters said to Zekthar. The old human remembers everything he taught us. The third trial was the Tower of Patience, a climbing structure that required warriors to wait for moving platforms to align properly before advancing. Impatience led to falls that could cause serious injury. Harry settled into the rhythm he had demonstrated to countless students, moving only when the timing was perfect. Captain Morgan watched from the spectator area with growing amazement. The elderly consultant she thought she knew was demonstrating skills and knowledge that seemed impossible for someone his age. How is he doing this? She asked Dr. Nathan Brooks. I don't know, Nathan replied honestly. I'm beginning to think I never really knew Harry at all. The fourth trial was the Pool of Clarity, where challengers had to swim across a lake filled with predatory fish while carrying a fragile crystal that could not be allowed to break. The test required calm thinking under pressure and the ability to move efficiently without panic. Harry entered the water slowly, holding the crystal above his head and using a modified backstroke that minimized splashing. The native fish investigated him curiously but didn't attack. Young Kithara typically thrashed through the water at high speed, often losing their crystals to breaks or drops. Harry's methodical approach carried him safely to the far shore. With his crystal intact. By the time he reached the fifth trial, the sun was setting and Harry was clearly exhausted. The Garden of Choices required challengers to navigate through an area populated by small, harmless creatures that would scatter if approached aggressively. The goal was to reach the center of the garden without causing any of the animals to flee. This trial had always been the most difficult for young Kithara to understand. Their instincts drove them to hunt and chase anything that moved. Learning to suppress those instincts and move with gentle patience was often harder than any physical challenge. Harry sat at the edge of the garden for 20 minutes, simply watching the small creatures go about their daily activities. Then he began to move through their habitat with the careful respect of someone who understood that showing mercy required more strength than showing violence. The watching Kithara fell silent as Harry completed the garden trial without disturbing a single animal. Even the youngest warriors recognized the incredible level of self-control this demonstrated. Their own attempts at this trial during training had been humbling experiences that taught them the difference between being a predator. The seventh trial stood before Harry like a monument to everything he had tried to teach decades ago. The Apex Challenge was not just a test of skill, but a demonstration of philosophy. In the center of a circular arena stood a massive creature native to Kepler 442b, a shadow beast that resembled a cross between a bear and a panther, with fur that seemed to absorb light and eyes that glowed like amber stars. The beast was magnificent and deadly, with claws that could tear through metal and reflexes faster than anything a human could match. But it was also intelligent, curious, and fundamentally peaceful and less threatened. The trial required the challenger to approach the creature, place a ceremonial band around its neck, and return to the starting point without harming it or being harmed by it. Young Kithara had always struggled with this challenge because their every instinct screamed at them to fight the apex predator before them. Many had failed by attacking the creature out of fear or pride. Others had tried to use stealth or deception, only to discover that the shadow beast could sense dishonest intentions. Harry stood at the edge of the arena, breathing heavily from his previous trials. His body ached in places he had forgotten existed, and his hands shook with exhaustion. Around the arena, hundreds of Kithara warriors watched in complete silence. Even the clicking sounds that normally accompanied their conversations had stopped. Dr. Nathan Brooks pressed against the barrier that separated spectators from the trial ground. Harry, that thing is huge. Even if you were 30 years younger, how could you possibly, by remembering why I designed this trial in the first place? Harry interrupted softly. This was never about physical confrontation, Nathan. It was about understanding. Zekthar moved to Harry's side, his compound eyes reflecting the arena lights. Teacher, the shadow beast has been alone on this world for 40 years. It may have forgotten how to interact with other beings peacefully. It could kill you before you take 10 steps into the arena. Harry looked up at his former student with a tired but genuine smile. Zek, do you remember the first lesson I ever taught your class? That a true hunter must understand his prey before he can hunt it successfully. Not just understand it, Harry corrected, respect it. Every creature has its own intelligence, its own motivations, its own right to exist. The moment you stop seeing other beings as worthy of respect is the moment you become nothing more than a killer. Captain Morgan watched from her position near the other human prisoners. She had given up trying to understand how Harry planned to survive this impossible challenge. The creature in the arena was clearly capable of tearing him apart without effort, yet the old man seemed calm, almost peaceful, as he prepared to face it. Harry entered the arena carrying only the ceremonial band and a small device he had retrieved from the ruins of his old equipment storage. The shadow beast noticed his presence immediately, turning its massive head to study this frail intruder with intelligent golden eyes. Instead of approaching the creature directly, Harry sat down in the sand about 50 feet away. The watching Kithara clicked in confusion. This was not how the trial was supposed to proceed. Challengers were expected to demonstrate courage and skill, not sit in the dirt like elderly humans taking a rest, but Harry knew exactly what he was doing. He activated the small device, and the arena filled with a soft, rhythmic sound that none of the watchers recognized. It was music, but not the kind humans typically enjoyed. This was a composition Harry had created during his years on Kepler 442b, based on the natural sound patterns that shadow beasts used to communicate with each other. The massive creature's ears perked up at the familiar sounds. It tilted its head, processing the musical patterns with obvious interest. Harry had spent months learning the shadow beast's language during his time as an instructor, understanding that true communication required effort and respect from both parties. Slowly, carefully, Harry began to sing along with the device. His voice was old and rough, but he remembered the tonal patterns that meant greeting, respect, and peaceful intentions. The shadow beast responded with low, rumbling sounds of its own, a conversation conducted in a language no one else in the arena understood. Pete Sullivan gripped the barrier rail so tightly his knuckles turned white. What is he doing? Is he actually talking to that thing? Yes, Zekthar said quietly. He is speaking the old language. The language we all learned, but most of us forgot. The conversation between human and shadow beast continued for nearly an hour. Harry's voice grew stronger as muscle memory returned, his pronunciation becoming more confident as the creature responded with increasing interest. They were not just communicating, but actually getting to know each other. Finally, Harry stood up slowly and began walking toward the shadow beast. The massive creature watched his approach without alarm, its golden eyes showing curiosity rather than aggression. When Harry reached touching distance, he extended his hand palm up in a gesture of respect. The shadow beast lowered its great head and allowed Harry to scratch behind its ears. The watching Kithara gasped in amazement. No one had ever seen a shadow beast, except physical contact from another species. The creatures were known to be intelligent but utterly solitary. Harry produced the ceremonial band and showed it to the shadow beast, explaining in the creature's own language what he needed to do and why. The massive predator considered this request for several minutes, then lowered its head further to allow Harry to slip the band around its neck. The trial was complete, but Harry didn't immediately return to the starting point. Instead, he continued his conversation with the shadow beast, asking questions about its 40 years of solitude and sharing stories of his own life. The creature seemed genuinely interested in this strange old human who had taken the time to learn its language. When Harry finally walked back to the starting point, the shadow beast followed him partway, as if reluctant to see their conversation. The massive creature settled down at the edge of the arena and continued to watch the proceedings with obvious intelligence. The silence among the watching Kithara stretched for several minutes. No one seemed to know how to respond to what they had witnessed. Finally, Zekthar stepped forward and spoke in the formal tones reserved for sacred occasions. The final trial has been completed successfully. The challenger has demonstrated the skills and wisdom of a true hunter. A ripple of clicking sounds spread through the crowd as the assembled warriors processed what they had seen. This was not the kind of victory they had expected. There had been no violence, no demonstration of physical dominance, no proof of superior killing ability. Instead, they had watched an elderly human accomplish through respect and understanding what most of them could never achieve through force. One of the older hunt masters stepped forward, removing his ceremonial helmet to address Harry directly. Teacher, I am Velenex the Wise. Student designation K-12. You taught me to hunt with honor 39 years ago. Harry squinted at the scarred alien face. then smiled with recognition. "Vel, you were always the thoughtful one? I hoped you had become a leader among your people." "I did until I forgot your lessons and became a leader of killers instead. Watching you tonight has reminded me of what I used to believe was possible." Other former students began stepping forward, identifying themselves and sharing similar confessions. They had all achieved positions of power and respect within Kithara society, but they had also all gradually abandoned the principles Harry had taught them in favor of easier paths that satisfied the bloodlust of their followers. Zekthar watched this reunion with growing emotion. His former teacher had not just passed an impossible trial, but had awakened something in the Kithara that had been sleeping for decades. The desire to be more than simple predators. The pride that came from mastering oneself rather than dominating others. "Teacher," Zekthar said formally, "you have fulfilled your part of our agreement. I hereby release your companions and acknowledge that the old ways have value. But I must ask, what happens now? How do we return to teachings that most of our people have forgotten?" Harry looked around at the assembled Kithara, seeing hope in their alien faces for the first time in 40 years. "We start the same way we did before, Zek, with young ones who are willing to learn. But this time we don't hide the program or pretend it doesn't exist. This time we make it a permanent part of how your people raise their children." Dr. Nathan Brooks and the other humans were released from their holding area and joined Harry in the arena. They stared in amazement at their elderly friend, finally understanding that he was far more than the simple consultant they had thought. "They knew, Harry," Nathan said softly. "Who are you really?" "I'm a teacher," Harry replied simply. "I always have been. Everything else was just the job they gave me to pay for the privilege." Over the following days, word of Harry's trial spread throughout Kithara space at faster-than-light speeds. The legendary Harrison Kane had returned and proven that the old teachings still worked. Huntmasters who had abandoned honor began reconsidering their paths. Young Kithara demanded to learn the disciplines their elders had forgotten. Zekthar publicly disbanded his blood games and petitioned the Kithara High Council to re-establish the human training programs. The council agreed unanimously, understanding that their species had lost